and everyone that touches on the system, the educational partners, everyone out there. So our talk today is really about how we can support the process of adolescent development, parents that both love and are frustrated by their teenagers, and how we can really take a team approach to all of this. So what we're really hoping to focus in on today is, we'll talk about some of the key elements of adolescent development. We'll talk about what would be considered normal adolescent development, whatever that means, okay? And when there may be some tipping points that develop for young people that could signal a call to action, could signal a call for adults to get involved and really try and sort out what the experience is of a teenager, okay?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we'll also share innovative strategies and lead a discussion that will illuminate strategies for communication with adolescents. And then lastly, we'll discuss the continuum of local and then national resources that are available to parents when they do realize that the tipping point has occurred and they're on, the downslide of such tipping point and really do need to reach out.
Adolescent development. I just love this picture and had to put this in here. If this doesn't sum up 2020, really just about the virtual realm that all of us are existing and coexisting in right now. So just wanted to take a minute here and kind of take a look at what we would consider the average teenage brain, okay? This is pretty accurate if we really kind of step back and look at the components of what is happening for our adolescents out there right now, okay? You see in the frontal lobe, which is the left part up top, just a big love sort of center where relationships and feelings of attraction and all of these pieces take such a predominant part of the adolescent brain. So I always like to show this just to highlight that adult and teenage priorities often align, and then often there are many, many, many ways in which there are, ways that teenagers and adults, parents, really just think differently and approach the world differently based on what we are interested in the moment, okay? So if we take that a little bit of a step further, we have what we would consider the stages of adolescence. As we know with any stage models or frameworks, this is not an exact continuum. Adolescents do not move from 10 to 21 in this exact progression, okay?
Wouldn't that be convenient?
Wouldn't that be awesome,
yes.
right?
Yes.
But this is sort of a general kind of overview of what happens in what we consider early adolescence. Early adolescence in most research and most frameworks is sort of that 10 to 13-year-old age range. So what we see happening at kind of the early start of adolescence is we see the beginning of puberty. We see a lot of changes that happen in education and school, friend groups change. And at this early stage, parents usually, and again, I say usually knowing that all of this can be different based on an individual family, but parents usually are still in the position of having the most influence in that early kind of adolescence, 10 to 13-year-old age range, okay? So then we have a shift in that 14 to 16-year-old range. What often happens is we see changes in relationships with parents. At times, this is a period of higher conflict, going right back to sort of early theories about human development. One of the key elements is autonomy and independence. So at that 14 to 16-year-old age range, we really might start to see teenagers pushing back, okay? Testing limits in a more significant way. At times, really giving parents a run for their money, so to speak. And at other times, sort of moving faster into a more mature kind of adolescent state, which we typically see 17 to 21 years old, okay? So within that 17, let me just do a quick move on that. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
1 second here.
Sure.
Came out of my view.
Mm-hmm.
So in this kind of 17 to 21-year-old range, which we consider late adolescence, There's actually a lot of research out there currently that would suggest that the 17 to 21 is really more like 17 to 26 or 27. There's a great growing body of research around that out there right now.
Where that frontal lobe is still developing,
Yeah,
really.
exactly.
Yeah.
So what we see in this stage of the adolescent realm here is that we see a lot of major life decisions taking place about relationships of significance, around career choices or career path, educational choices, what sort of schooling arrangement are kind of late adolescents interested in. That can shift very rapidly in that period of time. However, there's more thought and more processing and more expression of what a young person might be interested in this period. And then we also see, amongst all of these phases, we see shifting self-esteem. Okay, adolescence is a period of great self-consciousness in many ways, which coincides with individuals figuring themselves out. Part of the figuring out process is, what limit can I test? How can I test over here? What does this relationship look like now? If somebody says yes to me in this context, will mom, dad, or teacher say yes around a similar request? We see a lot of those sort of testing behaviors start to take place around this period of time. So just wanted to share that as a quick snapshot. Again, not a perfect continuum.
Yeah.
There's regression, there's progress, but there's sort of a general framework around that.
Right.
So we're going to shift on over to Maureen, who's going to share some other ideas with us.
So let's talk a little bit about what can derail normal adolescent development. And many things can derail normal adolescent development. However, even the languaging here, which is the language that we adopted for this presentation, it's a little bit of a misnomer because it really infers that there was like one singular event that threw everything off track. The train was moving smoothly to its destination, and if it weren't for that one thing, and that can be the case in instances of a major traumatic event, but often it's a many ingredient recipe. And there are a number of things and the confluence of those things that are working together to create a situation where an adolescent is off track, so to speak, and parents do need to reach out for help. So when I think about adolescence, oftentimes the first thing I think of chronologically is a learning issue. A learning issue can certainly result in low self-esteem, feelings of isolation, anxiety, that feeling like everybody else gets it and I don't. Yeah. The most common types of learning disabilities are problems with reading, writing, processing, math. There can be math disabilities, listening, speaking. While every kid struggles from time to time with homework and assignments and so forth, if there's a learning area consistently and clustered in a particular manifestation of it, that might signal, a learning issue. We also, of course, trauma. I referred to that a little bit ago. Trauma, there are big T traumas and small T traumas. And oftentimes to an adolescent, the small T traumas are big T traumas to them. And when I think of trauma, there are again, big T traumas, the loss of a parent, the loss of a loved one, a major medical issue, or a combination of those things. But there are other things. I can't tell you how often parents talk to me about the death of a pet, a move, and it can be a move where a child has to change school districts and go from being big fish in a small pond or well known by peers and then suddenly to an unfamiliar area. Family discord, of course. So parents who are divorcing, or even parents who are in kind of a volatile dynamic with another child, which seems to be the one that's acting out and the one that needs all the attention. And then there's another child who is maybe anxious, concerned, and whatnot. So family discord is certainly a variable. Of course, bullying. And bullying at this point in our lives, has taken on a whole new meaning. There's the sort of classic playground in real life bullying, but most often we're seeing kids bullying on social media or using mass communication like text, YouTube, filming things, shaming, posting peers online, and using, you know, the internet and social media as a mechanism to bully. A health or medical issue, again, I've worked with many adolescents and parents where this is a major medical issue, and that can result in lost time with peers, can interrupt the continuum, that messy, somewhat continuum, and bring an adolescent back maybe to an earlier stage and phase. And certainly a medical issue can result in fear, anxiety, sort of an existential, like what's going to happen next, and you know, that kind of thing. Anxiety and depression can be an issue in and of itself, or it can be a symptom. It can be a symptom of any or all of the issues that we're talking about and that I've outlined earlier, with bullying and a medical issue and so forth. Anxiety and depression runs in families, so it might be an issue in that family and manifesting in, you know, in that adolescent. Attachment, we know that early healthy attachment to a supportive, competent caregiver is key to healthy attachment and human development. In cases such as adoption, that can be interrupted, and certainly this can cause problems later in life. What else do we have? So gender identity and sexuality issues. I don't know if you share this view, but oftentimes this is a difficult issue for parents due to generational differences in views, cultural, religious, and so forth. But teens and young adults can struggle deeply with issues of self-acceptance, peer acceptance, family acceptance, and then the same, you know, familial, cultural, and religious dynamics and barriers around that issue. Drug use is another one that can be an issue in and of itself in the case of substance abuse and going along to the continuum of course, addiction, or it can also be self-medicating. A teen who's self-medicating with the depression and anxiety. And I tell parents it's an issue, it's either this kind of an issue or that kind of an issue, but in either case, it certainly is a problem. Drug use is certainly a problem. And then for some teens, the drug of choice is electronics. For teens and actually adults at this point in time. It's a difficult one because we're using technology right now to have this meeting. It's one of those, you need it, but it also, there's again, the proverbial tipping point here where it becomes an asset or a liability. You know, smartphones, tablets, laptops, social media, and then gaming. The WHO, the World Health Organization, now recognizes gaming disorder as a mental illness. So adolescents who are just plugged in and can't seem to unplug. I have to put COVID on there, COVID-19, of course, and I'm going to bookmark that a little bit, and we'll swing back and talk about COVID-19 and standalone in a little bit. So we promised to talk about the tipping point, and again, I use the word messy. It's not it's not like you can take your temperature and know exactly, you know, it certainly is a continuum, and it's difficult for many reasons. And one is that even, again, normal adolescent development can be a time, as Matt eloquently stated, pushing boundaries, emotional dysregulation, struggles with friendships. And I've had parents, well, maybe even friends, family members, like, my child has gone crazy, you know, and it's called adolescence. So it's just very hard to discern when it's normal adolescent, you know, behavior and pushing boundaries, or if it's really a call for help or a call for action. So knowing the difference is, I would call it an art and a science. So it's part head and part heart for a parent. I've spoken to many parents, and I'm sure you have, Matt, where they'll say, I just knew something was wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
I couldn't put my finger on it, but I just knew that something was wrong. Sometimes some signs are very obvious: weight loss, weight gain, school refusal, that very obvious in your face. You know, that's just right, very, very visible. And some are very much less so, very subtle: withdrawal, lack of interest in activities that an adolescent used to find engaging, and so forth, but just that subtle withdrawal. So that's where we get to the tipping point between the teenager that is acting out, like the title of our presentation today is acting out or acting in. So the acting out teenager is the one who's very externalizing their behavior, pushing boundaries, drug use, beyond parental control, just, you know, that very, you know, very emotionally dysregulated in the home. And then the adolescent that's acting in is no less, isn't struggling any less than the acting out teenager, but it's kind of an inward turning teen who is, you know, struggling with anxiety, depression, and kind of like turning all of that inward. In my own work with adolescents and their parents, I'm constantly reminded of the metaphor of the iceberg. It's very simple. And what you see on the surface is usually a small bit of what is going on. And what's going on under the surface is really what we really need to be able to take a look at. On the surface, you might see that acting out, but under that is, you know, low self-esteem and, you know, struggles with self-acceptance. The same with the adolescents that's acting inward. What you see is, you know, withdrawal or maybe aloof. They're just in their room all the time. Just, they have no time for anyone else. They just seem kind of like maybe entitled or detached, when really below the surface, there can be a lot of self-doubt, self-loathing, depression, anxiety.
Yeah. And just a thought jumping off them, or it just makes me think of conversation I have with parents very frequently, and teenagers and colleagues and other professionals. The other part I like about this iceberg metaphor, you know, science and research tell us that we actively use about 7% of our conscious brain, which is kind of, for me, really shocking to think about, that 93% of our brain function and, you know, process is taking place at the subconscious level. So we are judging, we're making decisions, we're responding to anxiety without necessarily really being connected to it in a conscious way. So this really makes me think about that too. And so much of our work that we do with adolescents is to try and get to that next layer of processing. On both the emotional, the cognitive, and the psychological level. So just wanted to put that out there because this really makes me think about that too. And how much we just are not aware of around what's happening in our own internal process.
Right.
Yeah.
Good point. So the tangled sort of ball of thread, if you will, if you imagine a ball of thread or this word cloud. And this one trauma is in the middle, and the biggest, you know, appearing to be the central issue. You could pull any one of these others, which are, you know, family discord, a medical issue, a learning issue, anxiety, depression, a family move, death of a parent or a loved one, or so many different things, and blow it up into that central word for each individual. You know,
right.
It's unique. It's as unique as an adolescent's thumbprint. However, I am very much aware that one word that I did not add to this word cloud is COVID. So this is another variable that we're called upon to really talk about today as well.
Exactly. I had to go with Ernie. Or is this Bert? This is Bert.
No, it's
Ernie.
Ernie.
Yeah,
it's Ernie.
It's Ernie. I don't know. Something about this just really kind of summed up the experience of so many people out there right now, brought to you by the letters WTNF. To say that this has been a disruptive period is a wild understatement. So just wanted to spend a couple of what's happening out there right now, very much connected to what's happening in the adolescent world, but also very much connected to the family experience, how people are managing their lives right now. So we're going to touch on a couple of those points here connected to the year 2020. Okay. So again, stating the obvious, what's happening right now with COVID-19, the coronavirus, it's created such significant public health, emotional, and financial disruptions to the world. I would also add in there political disruptions. I would add in there socioeconomic and social disruptions, so many different areas. And why I put the picture on the right, why we thought that that kind of really sums it up well. First of all, it's a very familiar sight to people these days. Sort of the safety precautions related to COVID-19. And when we really look at each one of those, bringing it back to our focus on adolescence, any one of these areas is already incredibly challenging for an adolescent who may be sort of self-absorbed in the moment or thinking about short-term instant gratification. The whole idea of the kind of sanitary needs of COVID-19, the social distancing needs for adolescents is like earth-shattering for many.
Right. Yeah.
And just when we really think about what is being asked of us as a society, it becomes really clear why so many people have experienced such major sort of upset, disruption, and kind of an amplification of any challenges that might have been taken before COVID-19 around mental health and emotional well-being, and then in so many other ways. So we'll spend a couple of minutes outlining some of these ideas. And when we think about, the educational environment, there's, as people on here are well aware of, there's a very wide range of how different individual schools and school districts are managing the learning process, whether it's a virtual learning remote process, a hybrid sort of in-person and then remote, or fully remote, or fully in person. There's a lot of different arrangements out there. Any one of those arrangements has great opportunities for students as well as really big challenges, sometimes in ways that no one could have possibly anticipated. Thinking back to March, no one could have really anticipated the breadth and scope of the impact of COVID and how that has really affected people on a day-to-day basis. And then just one more point around what we hear about very, very frequently from both parents and teenagers, the disruptions to the home life, okay, to the flow of being in a family within a home environment, okay? So many parents experience this increase and really some challenge points around balancing what I call these hybrid home environments. And by hybrid home environment, what we're talking about is we're working from home, we're educating from home, we're parenting from home, we're socializing from home. And all of this typically experienced through really great isolation from the outside world for many, many people. And that isolation piece, at least what I've experienced and heard from people, really is on sort of a bell curve. A lot of folks, families, teenagers that I've spoken with are sort of in the middle of the bell curve, which is kind of like we've sorted some of this out and we're moving along and doing the best we can. And then you see people that have, really been pushed to some of the extremes around that. I've had, individuals that I've been engaged with that haven't left the house in 3 months. I've had other people that have tremendously high safety fears and concerns because of medical complications in the family or just a natural aversion to germs anyways.
Yeah.
Whatever it might be, all of that is really amplified. Yeah. And then other people that are, anti-maskers and this is a hoax, don't believe any of it, I'm out there running around. And that's, this is what we see. This is the spectrum. So we can't have any talk about adolescence without referencing the pandemic that is currently happening and all of the impact on the family system. Okay, so just wanted to spend a minute on that.
If I could jump in with a quick comment, because it honestly just occurred to me that in this realm, parents and adolescents are having kind of a parallel experience.
Absolutely.
Right? We didn't talk about that.
No.
Because we talk about, like, parents and adolescents and the interplay between the two. But I know for me, like trying to manage Zoom and get on and having technical issues and just being in this virtual world, and then, my teen having the same experience. So it's kind of a parallel process.
Totally true. Yeah, great point. So this is another area I really like to kind of explore with people. This is the Kubler-Ross grief model, which is a very well-known, well-researched framework for how human beings respond to grief, loss, or major life disruptions, okay? So I just wanted to put this up here. I found it particularly in the early couple of months of COVID. I still use this regularly, but particularly in the early months, I found this to be really helpful in having conversations with teenagers about how we respond to huge life disruptions unexpectedly. And going back to Maureen's points about trauma, trauma ultimately is the consistent exposure to distressing events over a short or long period of time that has a direct impact on our well-being, okay? So one could argue that COVID has had a traumatic effect on many people's lives, and then just the general flow of our sort of day-to-day, week-to-week, longer-term perspective. So I really like this model because it's a great way to think about for ourselves, okay, where am I at today? I'm feeling really agitated with Zoom, or I'm feeling really like I wasn't expecting to be in this position, right? Yeah. So a lot of us have cycled through these stages, and like all stages, this is not a clean linear progression. There are high points, low points, ups and downs. But a lot of us experienced an initial shock, okay, back in March around like, okay, this is crazy and surprising and shocking. Okay, I have to plan childcare for 1 week of school. Okay, so there was like a shock. Time moved forward. There was a prolonged sort of disruption to education and the world in general. A lot of us experienced denial, so just pure disbelief, looking for evidence that this can't possibly be true, or looking for evidence that this is totally true, and fact checking and diving onto the internet and then taking a break because the internet's too much.
Watching the news.
Watching the news, then not watching the news, the whole deal. And then a lot of us experience, big frustrations that things are just not the same. You heard a lot about the concept of new normal or adjusted normal, okay? There's a lot of frustration that people felt amongst that, okay? I talked to a lot of people, both professionally and personally, who really felt like a big depressive energy dip, a big low in energy because of the unpredictability and uncertainty. It's part of the brain's response as we try and synthesize information and sort out and make sense of it. Side by side with that, I've heard from a lot of people, again, personally and professionally, around huge sleep disruptions or increases in substance use, or that there's been a lot of impact and ripple effect of how we've experienced this big disruption to our lives. Some of us have noticed that we start to experiment with this a little bit. Okay, sort of here's where we're at. Maybe I can try one thing to make this a little bit easier for my family or for myself, okay? So maybe that was trying a new technology that could help us stay connected in a different way, or trying an interaction with our child or teenager that might have produced a different result. Things like that. We just experimented.
Baking muffins. Everyone started baking.
Everyone started baking muffins. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. And then we had to make some hard decisions about what do we want to do with this? How do we learn to work in this new situation? What do we, really not like about it? And where are there opportunities potentially to try something different? So I certainly experienced a lot of people feeling more positive over time as they started to kind of navigate this differently and sort out what could possibly work a little bit better or a little stronger for themselves or their families or their professional lives, okay? And then there's kind of a final stage, again, this is nonlinear, where we've, can potentially have like integrated all these changes. We've adapted and we've felt a sense of renewal or a sense of return to energy, so to speak, to sort of manage what's happening out there in the world right now. So just wanted to show this again as a reference to how human beings typically react to a really sudden, unexpected change in our day-to-day life. Okay. The executive functioning brain map, another one that I love to talk with people about because it's so accurate when we think about where can things go off for us, okay? And I really wanted to talk about this, and Maureen and I talked about this so many different times, about when we think about the grief response that so many individuals experience, whether it's COVID related or any of the other tipping point topics that Maureen spelled out, what happens is that this has a direct impact on our brain function. There'll be no surprise to people out there. But what stress does, and when individuals feel great distress or anxiety or low energy or low mood, is it hits different parts of our brain function. For example, some people, it will really hit kind of that lower quadrant around brain organization, okay? My brain is so overwhelmed and pulled that I have lost my ability to plan or prioritize anything, okay? The brain is like in a state of overwhelmment, okay? For other people, it comes in this category of what we call brain fluency, and that's sort of, our memory and our processing speed, how we're taking in information and processing what is being presented to us. Under great distress, these are areas that can really become vulnerable and compromised for people. When we feel like we're having that same conversation with our teenager 40 times in the same day, they might be in a state of overwhelmment that we're not even seeing or in tune with, and it's because their brain is reacting to internal, subconscious, or even very present stressors in the moment. So I like to talk with people about how our brains are impacted in ways that we can recharge brain energy. Brain flexibility, changing perspective, changing attention. So many people describe this feeling of being pulled in so many directions right now, and the need to multitask in some ways has never been more present. As we are, many of us, living within the virtual realms professionally and personally. And that also has a direct impact too on what we call brain control. And that's basically how we manage our emotion, okay? How we even perceive our own emotional states, how we reflect on these, kind of internal processes. And then managing emotion. What do we do with that? If we're having a really high period of agitation based on prolonged stress for a day or longer or a week, how do we manage our emotions when we are more vulnerable to stress, the impact of stress and agitation? A lot of parents I've spoken with describe what they call a low-grade agitation in the house, where people are just sort of on edge, which is typically in response to big picture topics, what's happening in the global world, right down through what's happening with a math assignment that is just creating a stuck moment for a student or whatever it might be. All of these are connected to how our brain functions and how vulnerable we are when we're under great distress, okay? And tied into that, just kind of my quick, final point around this particular part. So, fight, flight, or freeze, okay? When our brain is in a state of overwhelmment, okay? And again, this can be a small overwhelmment that has taken on grandiose proportions in our brain, or it can be something really, big and significant that we have experienced either internally or from the outside world coming in, okay? So every one of us participating today has this built-in response mechanism, okay? Fight, flight, or freeze. When our brain goes into fight mode based on being overwhelmed, this might show as irritability, loss of temper, defensiveness, okay? When our kids and our teenagers are overwhelmed by a request and have multiple other stressors, we might see fight as a common response, okay? Coming at us, combative, offensive, okay? really just sort of putting it all out there. That's more of, the acting out part of acting out, acting in really ties in with the fight response. And then we see for ourselves and our kids and our teenagers, the flight response. The flight response, active avoidance, okay? And this is often very subconscious process for people, not totally in the forefront of our brain around why we might be avoiding something, but it creates this desire to flee, avoid, and get out of a situation as quickly as possible, okay? And then the third is freeze. And freezing basically is sort of it's almost a numbing process. We become numb to our own internal state. And what that can look like sometimes is we are so overwhelmed, we just have no idea where to go with the situation, okay? We might feel detached from it. We might feel like it's not even happening to us in the moment. This is the brain can go on lockdown and literally freeze around its ability to process and integrate information. So for some of our young people, we see this showing up in giving up easily, or I just can't do this, ripping a paper in half. F this, F that, I can't do it, I'm frozen in the moment, okay? So fight, flight, or freeze, I always like to remind parents and caretakers around this that what we see in front of us behaviorally or verbally is so connected to each of these three processes and ways that we respond to the world, okay?
We have a lot of material, so maybe
Yes.
this one.
Right.
This one.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to just jump back.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Yeah.
So obviously we've covered a lot of different areas already about brain function and development and tipping point of behaviors, what can signal to us adults that a young person might be in trouble. And again, that can come through behaviorally and what they're showing us, or as an internal process that we might be cueing in on, isolation, not talking with friends as much or reaching out to people, low-grade agitation that we sort of feel from a person that we're communicating with, okay? So given all that information, we want to spend time really talking about what do we do about this? So what can parents and adults and caretakers do in these situations? So we just want to touch briefly on some of the local and national resources available for people, and then we'll shift into opening it up to comments, questions, and feedback. Okay. So just wanted to give a very, very brief overview here. What's available to us locally within, primarily within the Massachusetts region and then just right outside. So a major sort of entry point into accessing support for a mental health or emotional challenge is often through the primary care interactions. Most primary care offices right now have integrated behavioral health screenings, ways to ask kids about mood, appetite, sleep. That could be an early indicator that there could be an emotional wellness issue or challenge taking place, okay? And so then we have sort of some tiers of support available to us. One is what we would consider more of a traditional therapy framework, okay? So it's individual therapy, often within an office environment or these days via telehealth. That's sort of that one-on-one relationship that we could access for our teenager or for our family in general. And so we can sort of move through this. And again, this continuum, how it's laid out here, isn't we try number 2 and then number 3 and then number 4.
Right.
Different parts of these can be brought into the process at any point in time, okay? So then we have kind of our more emergency services or our crisis intervention, often referred to as the emergency services teams in the area. There are many organizations that run emergency services teams out of the emergency room or at their organization's specific site. And that would typically involve an evaluation that could make a recommendation for a young person around a potential hospital stay if there are really big risk issues or safety issues. Then we have other options around day treatment programs that are more like an 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. sort of program, typically 2 weeks in time. And then we have a whole other variety of options for parents around decision making based on the needs of their child or adolescent. Okay, so just want to give a super brief snapshot about that. And 3 great starting places for any parent: primary care physician. Psychology Today, in my opinion, has the most robust search feature out there around matching based on your insurance and need area, et cetera. And then through your insurance website directly, often have really good sort of provider link and search directories attached to that.
All right, so essentially, if a parent and a family, tries some combination or maybe even all of the options that Matt just laid out on that continuum, that can, you can use any number of those interventions. If those don't work, oftentimes parents find their way to me. I get referrals from therapists, psychologists, testers, physicians, saying, things really are just not working, and parents are looking for something outside the box or something different to really affect some meaningful change for their adolescent. Another time that parents, explore the continuum that Matt identified, but then contact me, it's in situations of either the acting out or acting in, but situations where a teen is, or young adults. I also work with young adults, but it's a situation where it's dangerous, it's risky, they might be in harm's way, and parents need to do really essentially an intervention type situation. And they're looking to explore options and consider oftentimes an out-of-home placement. And I do want to reiterate that I'm never the first person that people want to call, and I feel that deeply. I rely on providers like Matt to really work with a teen, in the office. But if and when that's not working, again, I help parents try to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And essentially, for many teens, the first step needs to be stabilization and assessment. So there's a phase, it's typically 30 to 90 days. And this is a period to bring all those behaviors down. Take a child, again, I'll just use drug use and some other, the acting out behaviors. Take away all those stressors, take away the peer influence, take away electronics, drugs that are the acting out mechanisms that teens are using, and really put the pieces of the puzzle together, determine underlying causes. Medication is looked at very closely during this phase. For some adolescents, they need to begin a medication, or for many teens, I don't know if you're finding this, but they're on a variety of medications that really they need to do bringing everything down. And during this assessment and stabilization process, it's a good time to do that and come down to a baseline, and then explore medication moving forward. But it really is a kind of a reset button type situation, if you will.
Totally.
So here's therapeutic wilderness programs. And thank you, Matt Shea, for your kind introduction. And yes, I did work at a therapeutic wilderness program in Hawaii. But therapeutic wilderness treatment is probably where I get most of my phone calls from parents, and they use language like, a therapy camp or a wilderness therapy camp or outward bound with therapy, or things that, parents are trying to find this. And essentially it can be used as a stabilization and assessment period. It stops the teen from engaging in all the risky behaviors. It also increases distress tolerance. So teens who are just quick to act out, the thing's not working, my friend, that emotionality, often parents, and I'm a parent, Matt's a parent, sometimes we're part of it.
Yeah.
and we're rescuing our kids. And if our kids are uncomfortable, we're hardwired to make them more comfortable.
Yeah.
Nature doesn't do that. If it's going to rain, it's going to rain. If you're camping out and you're hiking, and it rains, it just is. And it builds distress tolerance. It removes the adolescents from substances, electronics, negative peer influences. This phase, therapeutic wilderness programs, they generally run maybe 8 to 13 weeks, roughly. And again, it's really an opportunity for a lot of kids to build resilience, build distress tolerance. Oftentimes there's a psychological evaluation that takes place during this time. And we also call it sort of like a fishbowl sort of an assessment, because you can see how adolescents do in talk therapy and what comes out there. You can see how adolescents do when they're frustrated. You can see how they're doing in the morning, in the evening, with peers, with all these essentially different dynamics. For many teenagers and for many families, kids go home after a therapeutic wilderness experience and reconnect with teams like Matt, and assimilate back into their homes and maybe back into their home school. But for many teens, they need to go on to a next step, or a therapeutic boarding school or a residential treatment center. A therapeutic boarding school can be a day school, and for many of the families that I work with, it can be a therapeutic boarding school. So essentially, once the teenager is stable and there's a clear assessment, clear picture of what's going on, those puzzle pieces have snapped into place and there's as much clarity as possible. Families choose this way of ongoing treatment, and it's, the provider treating the adolescent in wilderness might recommend that. It provides group experiences, community, and nature-based experience. And essentially, it's to practice and concretize or crystallize those skills learned in therapy. It's essentially what we call milieu treatment, milieu therapy. And it's the same for wilderness, because it's one thing to be talking to Matt as a therapist, in an office. And it's another thing to have like an embodied form of therapy where you're actually out, and the therapeutic modality is essentially it's nature. And typically therapeutic boarding programs last between 9 and 18 months, roughly. So again, main talking point for you folks today is what parents can do. And we've shared many of those resources, but I just wanted to pulse through this slide a little bit and just remark that I've never had a call from a parent and then followed up later and have them say, I wish I hadn't learned that, learned about that.
Right.
It's essentially just reach out, just reach out. The other thing I think that's very, very important for parents, and I include myself and Matt in this group, is to lead by example, do your own work, and essentially model that it's okay to have struggles and it's okay to reach out for help. So essentially, walk this journey, with your child. So when I've worked with parents, in a wilderness setting, and parents come out to visit their child in the wilderness and maybe fly all the way to Hawaii. There are many wilderness programs in out west as well, but families come together and have this kind of like multifamily workshops, sort of a universalized experience. And I credit a fellow therapist from years ago who was facilitating a group of parents, and one parent said, how did we get here? How did we get so off track that I'm out here in the wilderness with my adolescent? And that therapist said, what if you're not off track? Yeah. What if you're meant to be on this track all along and you're right where you should be, walking this walk with your child? That impacted me as a parent and as a therapist, and I take that story with me to this day. Yeah. So as predicted, we had a lot more material than we needed, and we are indeed at that wrap up, feedback, questions, open it up to discussion.
Awesome. Thank you to you both. That was amazing. And one of the themes that I really picked up throughout your presentation was the emphasis on really seeking first to understand what is going on with your child. And it was demonstrated beautifully with the photo of the iceberg. So really getting in there and understanding that the things that are up on the surface are a manifestation of a plethora of things that are underneath. And along those lines, in dealing with trauma, are there any ways or ideas to get ahead of the little t trauma? So for instance, are there ways to better prepare our children to be able to handle the little t trauma? The big T trauma, I think, kind of comes out of nowhere and it's really impossible to address. But are there ways that we can work with our children to help them be more prepared?
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump into that, Matt. That's such a great question. How I conceptualize this and talk with people about this is to the best of our abilities, is to establish daily priorities. Okay, and when we think about daily priorities, I'll give an example of a family I'm connected with right now. They set out to have 3 priorities for each one of them as an individual, and then for each of their children every day, okay? So one of their children has chosen to do a 15-minute mindfulness podcast every day, to take a half-hour bike ride at a minimum every day, and take 1 dish to the sink out of their attic space, okay? He agreed to this, okay? I'm not making this up, right? And that is, I think, a prime example of building in small successes every day, as well as, and kids will often not say this, but they actually feel really good contributing to the household responsibilities. So anytime we can support exercise, anytime we can support doing something for your mind every day, and then contributing to the well-being of your household or your family every day, that is where you see the scaffolding. Okay, you see people develop wellness habits that make it so they can handle small disruptions and more consistently handle the larger disruptions that will come our way. So really, it's about that daily priorities and daily sort of ways that we can get involved around wellness.
And for me, I would also say, back to one of the earlier, the last couple of slides, but it's kind of like walking the walk and talking the talk with your child, because there are small T traumas that are going to happen every day. You're going to have one today, and then you're going to go home and maybe talk to your daughter. Guess what happened? Right. This thing happened, and and just kind of communication as much as possible with your teen, so that when the small T traumas do happen, mild irritations to actually maybe something bigger than that, your teen will tell you about it, because you're also reaching across and sharing as well. Totally. So sort of,
and Cordelia put in a really awesome comment, and I don't know if she is comfortable to come off mute and just kind of bring that up to you guys.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Cordelia.
Hi.
Hello.
Well, a little background. Our son has ADHD or ADD, and he's just started with the fusion counseling. So he had like 2 weeks every day, and now that school started, once a week a check-in. And for us, it's a godsend, because it's so hard to understand what's going on in his brain. It's so different. I'm a very structured, I love lists, I'm an organizer. So yeah, well, of course, some things would help him, but it's mom who says it, and I'm not like you. So of course, he's not really willing to listen at this point. And so the coach who knows much more about it is very helpful. So that's how we came to Fusion. And I do like these talks because, well, I'm interested in the brain anyway, and in how people function and work. And so, and I was thinking, yeah, it's not only our child's brain, we are still in a development too, maybe a little bit mature, but we go through the motions, we go through phases, we are stressed, and well, whatever we going through has impact on our son and vice versa. So it was interesting also to see, okay, well, I can see myself in there. Oh, I can see my husband. Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, and then
Absolutely.
our son. And we're only a small family. Imagine we had 5 kids, you know, and maybe because we're a small family, everything is maybe more intense
Maybe
because
amplified.
it does not fizzle out to 5 kids. You only have 1 kid to look at. So, so there's pros and cons.
Right.
And
Great points.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
you know, I know Fusion is hosting us, so, you know, I'll put that out there, but I can't say enough about Fusion Academy as being a choice for your son. He's fortunate that you've stepped in that direction. I just, you know, the talent there at Fusion is just kind of second to none. So, so I just wanted to spotlight that. But you make a good point. We're all there's an inner adolescent in all of us,
Absolutely.
right? That teen brain or that
Yeah.
the anxiety brain and all of that. That's me. Like there's no question
Absolutely.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I appreciate your comments.
Yeah, and we all do wrestle with similar things, even some things that our son wrestles with his ADD. I mean, that comes up, maybe, but how to deal with it and how to learn to cope with it. And did you say that? Was that in there, that the brain can learn? I think in the very beginning,
Yeah.
wasn't it in there? So that was a very hopeful comment. It's like, I know some kids grow out of ADHD, but usually they don't. So they carry that with, that's just part of who they are, which is okay, but they have to learn. And that you said the brain can grow and learn. That is
Yes.
a good thing. That brings hope that he can one day, well, pay his own bills and be on time and
That's
Totally.
the goal.
Yeah.
function in society without his mom telling him you have to do this and this. And it really got better already. So I think he's really listening to his coach and trying to. And it was also the remote learning last year that did not go well for most kids. Was for him a wake-up call. I had also cancer and I couldn't really help him. And so he always said, I want to do it myself. After middle school, said, I want to do it myself. I want to do it myself. And we knew, well, you cannot really do it, but he kind of had to. And he didn't do anything. So he really realized, okay, I cannot do it.
Yeah.
And fortunately, at the end, it was pass and fail with the grades. So he kind of slithered through there last
Right.
second in a way and saved his grades more or less. But he learned a lot about himself and was then more open to, okay, it would be good if I learned something, and being open to work with Fusion. And
Yeah.
that
So
that
you
was the
might
process.
You might be past this, Cordelia, but there's a book called Driven to Distraction. There are a number of really good books about the ADD brain, ADHD brain. And I always use this language with teenagers, which is like, figure yourself out and then use it as your superpower. Like the ADD brain, there are some really great things about the unique way that his brain is organized. And so if you
Absolutely.
can figure that out and then use it as your Superman cape, you know, he's just, anyway, you understand what I mean about like your liability can also be an asset.
Right.
Right.
Totally.
It's just hard, I think, with how schools are structured, and I don't want to go into it. And I do like the schools, and I know they do their best, but how they are structured, that doesn't really help the ADD brain in a lot of cases. There's not enough hands-on. There's not a lot of room to do the physical, to balance I have to sit here and listen to the teacher for hours on end.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. That really, really helpful to get your personal perspective on this. And the brain is the most powerful muscle, which can totally be strengthened over time. So thank you so much for sharing.
It's very good to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thanks for the book. I wrote it down. I will look it up. Thank you.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
And since we've come to the end of our time, I did want to open it up to Maureen and Matt, if you had any final comments or anything like that. I did mention I'm going to be sending out the links to your the website and the follow-up, but yeah, open to you guys to close it out.
Perfect. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yep.
I think it's one that it applies to all of our lives. Of course, we've been centered around the teenage and adolescent. But you know, when we're reflecting on this and talking about all these topics, how much each of them resonates with us individually, as well as what we bring and the energy we bring to the connections we make in this field. And so, you know, I always feel optimistic knowing that, exactly like Cordelia was saying, and as we were talking about here, all of us can grow and change and develop. And the pace looks different and the sort of skill base looks different. But all of us will continue to have sort of a lifelong learning approach to this. So that's one of the things I always feel optimistic about, is the more we get to know ourselves and can support others in that way, we also, you know, learn how to ask questions differently to our children, or to present something differently, or to try something in a way that we might not have tried before. And all of those will yield a result of some sort. So I always encourage parents to step out of that kind of comfort box that we all live in. Try something a little bit different, see if it has a different outcome attached to it, and then reflect on it with your children can be really powerful. So I always like to think about those aspects when talking about teenagers and family life in general. And again, Matt, just wanted to thank you and Fusion for the time. It was great to get together today. So those are my sort of final thoughts.
Yeah,
So,
mine are really just simple, which is like, you know, reach out, and you can't, again, this is repeating my earlier remarks, but I have yet to meet a parent that said, I wish I didn't learn about that continuum or that slide. If you don't need the information, you don't need, say, a therapeutic placement consultant in wilderness and all these things, well, then that's great. But you know, the parenting journey can be very, very isolating, but it really does, it takes a village. So please just reach out. And thank you very much, Matt and Fusion Academy and Matt Doyle.
same.
No, thank you guys. You guys are awesome. And you impact so many lives, and it's good stuff. And thank you everyone who joined. And yeah, like I said, I'll be following up with the recording and the slides.
Awesome.
All right, take care.
Have a great day, all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.